She was a widow, broken by loss, living in the shadows of a palace. But when her kingdom faced betrayal, corruption, and deadly secrets, one woman's courage became the light that saved them all. This is the story of Margaret Rowan, a widow whose bravery defied fear, protected her people, and changed the fate of an entire kingdom. Can one heart truly save a nation? The night was quiet, my children, until the mountain cried. They said it was the wind, but those who listened closely swore it was the voice of sorrow, a sound that rolled through the valley of King's Hill, carrying a message of loss. In a small house built of red earth and steel roof, Margaret, the widow of Captain James Rowan, knelt by her window. Her husband, once the bravest guard of the royal family, had fallen months ago defending the king from an ambush. The crown had honored him. Yes, medals, promises, speeches, but what is gold to a heart that bleeds? Margaret's eyes followed the flicker of city lights below the palace hill. There was unrest in the land. The old king had grown weak, and his advisers whispered of betrayal. Greed had begun to eat the heart of the kingdom like termites in wood. Yet, amid the noise of politics and power, Margaret remained silent, a shadow of her former self, living only for her young son, Daniel, who was too small to remember his father's face. But that night, the cry from the mountains reached her soul. It was not sorrow alone. It was warning. The elders believed that when the mountain cried, danger was near. So at dawn, Margaret went to the palace gates. Her hands trembled, her clothes plain, her eyes heavy, but her voice, her voice carried strength. "I have come to see the king," she said. The guards laughed. "The king does not see widows," one replied. "Go home, woman." But Margaret stood firm. "The mountain has spoken," she said again, "and if the king does not listen, this land will weep more than I have." The crowd gathered. Some mocked her, others feared her courage. For in this modern age, few believed in the old signs. Yet her eyes burned with a light older than the city itself. And that was when Prince Adrian, the king's only son, came out. He had heard her voice. Something about it struck him, the same calm fire he once saw in his late father's guard, Captain Rowan. "Let her speak," the prince ordered, and there, in front of the royal court, Margaret told them what she saw. Dark shapes moving by night near the mountains, men dressed in black, digging near the sacred caves where the kingdom's water source began. "Your Majesty," she said softly, "they are poisoning the land." Silence fell. The ministers laughed again, calling her delusional. But Prince Adrian did not. He looked at her trembling hands, her fearless eyes, and he felt something stir within him, a call to courage. He turned to his father. "Father," he said, "let me go see for myself." The king hesitated. Age had made him fearful, but at last he nodded. And so began a journey that would test not only the courage of a widow, but the very soul of a kingdom. For the mountain's cry was not just a warning. It was the beginning of a prophecy. Listen, my children. When truth begins to rise, even mountains tremble. The morning after the royal court hearing, whispers spread across King's Hill Kingdom. Some called Margaret Rowan a madwoman. Others said she was touched by prophecy. But in the palace, her words echoed louder than the drums of festival. Prince Adrian could not rest. The thought of poison near the sacred caves, where the rivers of King's Hill began, burned in his mind. That night, against his father's wishes, he gathered a small team of royal guards. "Bring the widow," he said quietly. "She will guide us." When they came for Margaret, She was at her husband's grave, whispering a prayer. Her eyes widened when she saw the prince himself standing before her. "You truly believe me?" she asked. "I believe the mountain does not cry without reason," he replied. They set out before dawn, the prince, 3 guards, and the widow. The road curved through misty valleys and tall green hills. Birds sang, but their melody carried unease. By midday, they reached the foot of the sacred mountains. There, Margaret knelt and touched the soil. Her fingers came up stained. Dark, oily, wrong. "See," she whispered. "The land is sick." The prince ordered the guards to search the area. Behind thick bushes, they found what should never have been there: large metal barrels, half buried, leaking a black liquid that reeked of chemicals. Nearby, strange machines hummed, guarded by men in black uniforms. "Stop right there!" the prince shouted. The men turned, armed mercenaries, not locals. They raised their weapons. In that tense silence, the sound of a trigger clicking echoed through the valley. The prince's guards drew their guns, ready to defend. But Margaret stepped forward. "My sons," she called out, her voice steady, "you drink from this water. Your mothers do. Your children will do not destroy what feeds your own blood." Her words broke the air like thunder. One of the mercenaries hesitated, then lowered his weapon. Others followed. But not all hearts bend to truth. Their leader, a cold-eyed man in a black coat, sneered. "This land will be bought and buried," he spat. "The king cannot stop progress." Prince Adrian's jaw tightened. "Then the king will not stop you. I will." He charged forward. Shots rang out. Chaos erupted. Smoke rose among the trees. The guards fought bravely, but they were outnumbered. Margaret grabbed Daniel's old prayer bracelet from her pocket, clutching it tightly as bullets tore through leaves. She crawled toward one of the leaking barrels and kicked it over, the toxic sludge splashing into the leader's path. The man slipped, his gun falling away. The prince disarmed him and slammed his weapon into the earth. When the noise faded, the mercenaries fled, leaving their machines behind silence. Only the wind spoke now. The prince turned to Margaret, his chest heaving. "You saved us." She smiled faintly. "No, my son. The truth saved us. I only carried it." They stood before the poisoned stream, watching it slowly carry away the black stain. But Margaret's eyes darkened. "This is not over," she said softly. "If strangers dig our mountains, someone inside the palace gave them permission." The prince froze. For the first time, he understood. The danger was not only outside the kingdom, but within the royal walls themselves, and the mountain's cry had just begun. When Prince Adrian returned from the mountains, the air in King's Hill Palace felt heavier than before. The king rejoiced at his son's safe return, but when the prince spoke of barrels, poison, and armed strangers, silence fell like a heavy curtain. One of the ministers coughed softly. Another adjusted his golden wristwatch. They all avoided his eyes. "The Queen's Council will look into it," said Minister Collins, a tall man with a smile too polished to be true. "Surely, Your Highness," the widow exaggerated. Margaret stood beside the prince, her clothes still stained with soil and oil. "If truth could be washed away, Minister," she said calmly, "the river would be clean by now." A murmur swept through the hall. The king raised his hand. "Enough," he said weakly. "I will send for the investigators." But days passed, and no one came. The guards who had gone with the prince were reassigned. The files about the poisoned caves disappeared from the palace records. The machines in the mountains were quietly removed by night. Someone was covering their tracks one evening. As rain tapped the palace windows, Prince Adrian walked into the royal library where Margaret waited with a small lantern. She had been praying there for peace, but peace, it seemed, had left the kingdom. "Someone powerful wants this buried," Adrian whispered. Margaret looked up. "Then dig deeper." Her words gave him courage. Together, they began to watch, to listen, to look for the truth, not in the sunlight, but in the shadows. That was when they found Eleanor, a young maid in the palace who had seen things she dared not speak of. She came trembling to Margaret one night. "Madam," she said, "there are men who come through the servants' gate after midnight. They bring documents, sealed boxes. One of the ministers signs for them." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Which one?" Eleanor hesitated. "Minister Collins," she whispered, "and sometimes he meets someone from outside the kingdom." The next night, the prince disguised himself as a guard and waited near the servants' gate. The rain fell steadily, washing the marble tiles clean. Just past midnight, headlights appeared. A dark car stopped by the gate. Minister Collins stepped out, umbrella in hand. From the car emerged a stranger, the same cold-eyed mercenary who had led the poisoning team in the mountains. The prince's breath caught. He leaned closer, watching them exchange a heavy brown envelope. The mercenary said, "The next shipment arrives in 3 nights. The king must not know." "The king?" Collins laughed quietly. "He won't. He trusts me." That was when the thunder rolled. A loud, sudden clap that lit the sky. Both men turned, but the prince had already slipped back into the shadows. He returned to his chamber, heart pounding. Margaret waited there, her hands folded. "What did you see?" she asked. "The poison," he said softly, "was born in our own house." The widow sighed deeply. "Then the fight has just begun." She rose to her feet, her face calm yet fierce. "If truth lives in the shadows," she said, "then we must carry our lanterns there." And as the rain washed over the palace, 2 hearts, one royal, one humble, made a silent vow to cleanse their kingdom, even if it meant facing those who ruled it. Because courage, my children, is not only found on battlefields, sometimes it is found in whispers and in widows who dare to speak them aloud. After the stormy night, Prince Adrian could not sleep. The image of Minister Collins shaking hands with the mercenary haunted him like a restless spirit. He knew the truth now, but truth without courage is only a burden. At dawn, he went to see his father, King Edward Rowan, the ruler of King's Hill Kingdom. The king sat by the balcony, wrapped in a royal robe, staring at the golden horizon. Birds flew above the palace gardens, singing songs that could not reach his heavy heart. "Father," the prince began softly, "I have proof. Minister Collins is behind the poisoning. He works with men outside the kingdom. I saw him with my own eyes." The king did not turn. "Adrian, he said, "you are young. You see too much with your heart, and too little with your mind." The words cut like cold steel. "Father," Adrian insisted, "they are destroying our land. Our rivers are dying. The people, the king interrupted, need stability. If you expose this, the council will turn against us. The kingdom will fall into chaos. Do you want that?" For a moment, the prince stood speechless. He realized the king was not blind. He was afraid. Margaret waited outside the hall, watching the prince emerge with clenched fists. "He will not act," Adrian said bitterly. The widow sighed. "Kings listen to the wind that keeps their thrones standing. But sometimes that same wind brings a storm they cannot stop." That afternoon, whispers spread through the palace that the prince had angered. His father, Minister Collins, smiled wider than usual. his shadow stretching long over the marble floor. By evening, a new decree was announced. The prince is forbidden to make public statements without royal approval. It was a silent punishment, a warning. Margaret knew what it meant. The king was protecting his throne, not his truth. But that night, as the palace slept, she went to the old royal chapel. It was quiet, only the flicker of candles lighting the carved walls. She knelt and prayed aloud, her voice trembling. "O Lord, who watches the humble, give me strength not to fear those who sit on thrones. If silence rules this palace, let courage rise from its servants." As she prayed, the door creaked open. Eleanor, the young maid, entered in tears. "Madam," she whispered, "they are burning documents in the East Tower. The proof, it will be gone by morning." Margaret's heart raced. "Who?" "Minister Collins and his men. They're destroying everything." Without hesitation, Margaret ran to the prince's chamber. He was already awake, as though destiny had whispered to him too. "They're destroying the evidence," she said breathlessly. The prince grabbed his coat. "Then tonight, we save the truth." They hurried through the corridors, hiding behind columns as guards passed. Flames flickered through the windows of the East Tower. Papers flew like dying birds in the firelight. Prince Adrian kicked open the door. "Stop this!" he shouted. The guards froze. Minister Collins, standing near the fire, turned calmly. "Your Highness," he said with a smooth smile, "you should not be here. You've betrayed the crown." The prince thundered. Collins laughed softly. "The crown, my prince, belongs to whoever has the power to protect it. And right now, that is not you." He gestured, and the guards aimed their guns. Margaret stepped forward, fearless. "If you shoot him," she said, her voice like thunder, "you shoot your own future." The guards hesitated. Fear against conscience. And in that moment of stillness, the prince dashed forward, grabbed the burning file, and threw it to the ground, stamping out the fire. The room filled with smoke, but the truth was saved. Barely by dawn, the fire was contained, but the news of it spread like wildfire through the palace. The king summoned the prince again. "Why do you bring war into my home?" he asked wearily. "Because, father," Adrian said, "the war was already here. You just refused to see it." The king turned away, silent once more. His silence, heavier than any word, filled the room, and outside, as the first rays of light touched the palace walls, Margaret Rowan whispered to herself, "When a king fears the truth, it is the widow who must remind the land to listen." After the night of fire, King's Hill Palace was never the same. The marble floors still shone, the guards still saluted, but the air carried unease, the kind that made men speak softly and servants glance behind their shoulders. Prince Adrian stayed mostly in his quarters, watched by eyes he could not see. Minister Collins had tightened his grip on the palace, whispering to the council, weaving webs of loyalty with promises made in shadows. And King Edward, though his crown still glittered, had grown quiet, his silence no longer royal but fearful. But not all hearts bowed to silence. Margaret Rowan, the widow with calm strength, began to notice things others ignored. Late at night, she heard footsteps in empty corridors, voices carried from walls where no one stood. At first, she thought it was her imagination, until one night she followed the sound. A soft voice, like wind through hollow stone, called from behind the royal library, "Help us! Help us!" Margaret pressed her ear to the wall. Behind it, she could hear muffled sobs and whispers. The sound was faint, but it carried pain, human pain. The next morning, she went to Eleanor, the maid. "Child," she said gently, "who stays behind the library walls?" Eleanor hesitated. "No one is supposed to go there. That part of the palace was sealed years ago after the war. They say the late queen used it to hide prisoners." Margaret's heart pounded. "Prisoners? For what crime?" Eleanor whispered. "For knowing too much." That evening, Margaret told the prince what she had heard. "Beneath the east wing," Adrian said, remembering an old map, "there are old cells. No one uses them anymore. But someone is down there," Margaret said firmly, "and I believe they hold answers we need." So that night, they went together, carrying only a lantern and courage. The corridors were silent, except for their footsteps echoing through the stone dust, hung in the air like forgotten memories. When they reached the sealed wall, Adrian pressed against it. There must be another way in. Eleanor, who had secretly followed them, stepped forward. "There is," she whispered, pointing to a narrow passage behind a tapestry of the old queen. "I used to hide there when I was little." They entered one by one. The air grew colder. The smell of damp earth filled their lungs. Finally, they reached an old metal gate. Behind it were three weak figures. Pale, trembling, their eyes wide with shock, Margaret gasped. "You're alive!" One of them, an old man, spoke hoarsely. "We have been forgotten, but not dead. We were royal guards once. We knew too much about Minister Collins' dealings." Adrian's jaw tightened. "He imprisoned you?" The man nodded. "And your father allowed it, to keep peace in the council." Silence filled the chamber. Heavy, suffocating, Margaret turned to the prince. "Do you see now? The king's silence did not begin today. It began years ago. The truth hurt like a blade. They freed the men quietly, sneaking them through the old tunnels that led to the city's edge. As they stepped into the night air, Margaret turned back and looked at the palace. For the first time, she felt it not as a home of glory, but a cage of secrets. By dawn, whispers spread again, not from the walls this time, but from the people. "The widow walks with the prince at night," they murmured. "She has found the ghosts of the king's past." Inside the council chamber, Minister Collins received the news with a thin smile. "So," he murmured, "the widow digs graves of the past. Then she must learn what it feels like to be buried in silence." That same day, King Edward called Margaret to the throne room. His eyes were dark with worry. "You went where you should not have gone," he said sternly. Margaret bowed. "Forgive me, Your Majesty, but truth was crying beneath your own feet." The king's lips trembled. "You do not understand the cost of truth, woman." "And you," she replied softly, "do not understand the cost of silence." He turned away, unable to meet her eyes, for though he wore the crown, it was Margaret who carried the courage of a true ruler. That night, thunder rolled across King's Hill. Rain beat hard against the palace windows, as if the heavens themselves had begun to whisper, "The time of silence is ending." After the rescue of the hidden guards, whispers of rebellion drifted through King's Hill Palace like a restless wind. Prince Adrian felt the weight of his father's silence pressing on him. Margaret Rowan, the widow, felt it too, for courage often bears the heaviest burden. The palace halls were alive with tension. Some guards followed Adrian faithfully, while others hesitated, torn between orders from the king and the truth they now knew. One morning, the prince called a meeting with his loyal men in a quiet chamber. "We cannot allow the poisoners to return," he said firmly. But sir, a young guard protested, the king has forbidden action. If we disobey, we are traitors. Adrian's eyes burned. Then what is loyalty if it protects evil instead of the people? That afternoon, Margaret approached the king in private. Your Majesty, she said softly, loyalty is not obedience. It is courage, mercy, and truth. If your guards follow orders blindly, our rivers will die, our children will suffer, and the kingdom will crumble. The king's eyes were tired, shadowed with years of compromise. You speak boldly, woman. Loyalty is what keeps crowns on heads. Do you understand the chains you asked me to break? Margaret bowed. I understand. That is why I stand here. Meanwhile, Minister Collins moved quietly. Tightening his grip, he whispered into the ears of hesitant guards, weaving fear with duty. Do you wish to be accused of treason? Follow me, and you will survive. That evening, a test arrived. Rumors spread of new barrels hidden near the mountains. Some guards reported it immediately to the prince. Others hesitated. Unsure whether to obey the king's silent command, Prince Adrian decided to act. We move tonight, he declared, gathering only those who had chosen truth over fear. Margaret stood beside him. The chains of loyalty are strongest when forged by fear. Tonight, we break them. Under the cover of darkness, the small group crept through the palace corridors. Their footsteps echoed in the cold stone halls, where shadows whispered like ghosts of forgotten courage. At the edge of the city, they found the barrels. The black liquid glimmered under the lantern light. Two of the guards froze, remembering the king's warning. Margaret stepped forward. Loyalty is not fear, she said. It is protection. If you hesitate now, you protect no one, least of all your own families. The guards nodded, emboldened by her words. Together, they destroyed the barrels and set markers to alert the villagers of danger. Back in the palace, Minister Collins discovered their absence. Rage filled his eyes. They defy the king, he hissed. We will make them regret it. Prince Adrian and Margaret returned before dawn. Exhausted, but alive, the king awaited them, his face unreadable. You disobeyed my orders, he said slowly. Yes, father, the prince replied, but our loyalty is to the kingdom, not to fear. For the first time, silence filled the room, not the heavy silence of fear, but the tense quiet of understanding. The king realized that loyalty without truth could never save a kingdom. And Margaret, the widow who dared to speak where others bowed, knew one thing clearly. Courage would always shatter chains, if only hearts were brave enough to grasp it. After the daring raid on the poison barrels, King's Hill Palace seemed to breathe again. But that breath carried whispers, shadows, and unseen eyes. Prince Adrian knew one truth. Minister Collins was only part of the threat. Someone within the palace aided him. Someone trusted. Someone loyal in appearance, but deceitful at heart. It began with small signs. Letters disappeared from the prince's desk. Guards assigned to protect him seemed absent at key moments. Even Eleanor, normally brave, hesitated when delivering messages. One evening, Margaret noticed a shadow linger too long outside her room. When she approached, it fled. Her intuition whispered danger. You feel it too, she told the prince as they walked along the moonlit balcony. The enemy is closer than we think. Adrian nodded. I trusted many. Now, I cannot trust anyone fully. That night, the palace held a feast, a display of splendor and control. Ministers, guards, and nobles gathered under golden chandeliers. But hidden in the crowd, eyes watched for weakness. Whispers traveled faster than music. Margaret, seated near the prince, sensed the tension in the air. She leaned close. "Someone is signaling them," she whispered. "See the guard near the east corridor? He doesn't eat. He only watches." Adrian's eyes narrowed. He remembered the fire in the east tower. Could this guard have reported their raid? Suddenly, a crash echoed from the library. Everyone froze. A servant screamed. A table overturned. Guards rushed, but no one appeared. Only a note lay on the floor. "Stop meddling, or your kingdom will bleed from within." The hall grew silent. Eyes darted. Whispers rose like restless wind. The prince held the note, anger flaring. "This is no longer just Collins," Adrian said quietly. "Someone in this palace aids him. Someone powerful." Margaret's gaze hardened. "Then we must find them before they strike again." They began watching, observing, noting the smallest details, which guards lingered near the east wing, which ministers spoke in hushed tones, which servants avoided their eyes. Every smile could hide betrayal. Days passed. Then, a revelation. Eleanor approached Margaret secretly. "Madam," she whispered, "I saw it. The enemy is the head of the palace guard, Sir Malcolm. He gives information to Collins. I heard him speak to the stranger at midnight." Margaret's heart sank. Loyalty twisted into treachery, a chain of betrayal reaching the top. That night, the prince and Margaret acted. They confronted Sir Malcolm in the corridors. The guard drew his sword, eyes wide with panic. "You betray the crown," Adrian shouted. "I follow orders," Malcolm said, trembling. "Orders from those who protect the king's secrets." Margaret stepped forward. "You betray the people, not the king. That is the difference." A battle ensued. Steel clashed in echoing halls. Adrian fought with righteous fury, Malcolm with fear and desperation. Margaret threw herself between them when Malcolm lunged toward the prince. Her courage, steady and fearless, held him back long enough for Adrian to disarm him. Breathing heavily, Malcolm fell to his knees. I only obeyed." "Obedience without morality is slavery," Margaret said. "And today, you are free to choose justice instead." By dawn, the palace corridors were quiet again. The enemy had been unmasked, but Margaret and Adrian knew this was only the beginning. Others would still hide in shadows, waiting to strike. As the sun rose over Kings Hill Palace, Margaret whispered to the prince, "The enemy among us is patient, clever, and disguised, but courage will always find them." And the prince understood. Battles were no longer just in the mountains or fields, they were here. Within walls he had thought safe, within the hearts of those he trusted. After Sir Malcolm's betrayal was revealed, Kings Hill Palace seemed safer, but danger lurked in shadows. Minister Collins grew cleverer, weaving plots like threads in a web. The prince and Margaret knew they could not fight alone. Margaret called a secret meeting in the palace library where sunlight barely touched the dust-covered books. Eleanor, still small but brave, brought word of potential allies, loyal servants, overlooked guards, and even one minister who had quietly opposed Collins for years. "Together," Margaret said softly, "we can form a shield for the kingdom. Alone, we are targets. United, we are a force that fear cannot touch." Prince Adrian nodded. "We need secrecy. Collins must never suspect our alliance. He moves like a snake, and one wrong step could end everything." Their first ally was Captain Daniel, a veteran of the Royal Guard who had grown wary of Collins' manipulations. He brought maps, knowledge of hidden passages, and a quiet courage that anchored their group. Next came Minister Eleanor Grant, a quiet but observant council member who had long disagreed with Collins' methods. She agreed to feed information, never appearing in public meetings with them. Finally, a few loyal servants joined, men and women who had watched the kingdom suffer silently, but now found courage in Margaret's resolve. Tonight, Margaret said, we begin. Under the cover of darkness, the Alliance moved through hidden corridors. Lanterns were covered, footsteps muffled. Each member understood the risk. Discovery meant imprisonment, exile, or worse. Their first mission was simple but vital: intercept a shipment of weapons and poisons. Collins planned to move into the city. The barrels were stored near the old stables, guarded by mercenaries Collins had secretly brought in. Prince Adrian led the group. Margaret followed, steady and vigilant. Eleanor relayed messages silently, while Captain Daniel coordinated their movements. They reached the stables. Shadows of horses stretched across the walls. Mercenaries were counting crates, unaware of the figures creeping behind them. Margaret signaled, and the Alliance moved as one. Lanterns were raised briefly. A flash of courage, and the guards and servants overpowered the mercenaries silently, binding them with ropes. Adrian opened the crates. Inside were barrels of poison and swords, evidence of Collins's growing treachery. They moved quickly, destroying what they could, hiding the rest. By dawn, the stables were empty. The threat neutralized, and the Alliance had grown stronger, a network of courage hidden in plain sight. But danger always comes with a price. As they returned to the palace, Margaret caught a shadowy figure, watching them from the east tower. Her heart skipped. Collins' eyes, she realized, could be anywhere. Stay vigilant, she whispered to the group. The hidden alliance has begun, but the enemy knows our steps. Our courage must be greater than his cunning. Prince Adrian nodded, looking at Margaret with a mix of gratitude and awe. With you by my side, I feel we can face anything. Margaret smiled faintly. No, Adrian, it is not just me. It is all of us. Courage spreads when it finds willing hearts. That is the true power of a hidden alliance. And as the sun rose over King's Hill Palace, the kingdom seemed brighter. But the shadows of deceit still lingered. The battle was far from over, yet hope had found its secret home in the hearts of the brave. The palace was alive with music and golden light. Minister Collins had arranged a feast in the grand hall, welcoming nobles, guards, and council members. Every chandelier sparkled, every table overflowed with fruits, roasted meats, and spiced wines. Prince Adrian and Margaret knew better. Their secret alliance had learned whispers of Collins' next plan, a poisoned feast designed to strike the hearts of those loyal to the kingdom. Margaret stood near the grand entrance, her eyes scanning the crowd. Adrian, she whispered, the enemy is among the plates. One sip, one bite, and the kingdom could fall before the night is over. The prince clenched his fists. We must act carefully. If Collins suspects, the feast could become a trap for us instead. They moved subtly, mingling with the crowd, noting the servants carrying platters. Eleanor, the young maid, followed at a distance, her eyes wide and alert. Captain Daniel signaled the alliance members, quietly intercepting suspicious trays. They examined the drinks and food, their movements hidden beneath polite bows and feigned attention. Suddenly, a noble gasped, pointing at a tray that seemed heavier than the others. Margaret approached calmly, lifting the platter. She sniffed and touched it, confirming her fear. The wine had a faint metallic scent. Poison, she whispered. Adrian's eyes met hers. Alert the others. With silent precision, the alliance began replacing the poisoned platters with safe ones. Every gesture had to appear natural, every motion invisible to Collins's watchful eyes, but danger was never far. Collins himself moved among the guests, smiling, observing, noting the smallest irregularities. His dark eyes lingered too long on Margaret and Adrian. As the feast reached its height, Collins raised his glass. To loyalty, to King's Hill, and to the future of our kingdom. The guests lifted theirs in response. The tension was unbearable. One wrong sip, and lives would be lost. Margaret's hand brushed Adrian's under the table. "The poisoned trays are removed," she whispered. "We have only moments before he notices." Captain Daniel and Eleanor executed the last part of the plan, subtly switching the remaining suspect trays. Finally, the feast continued without incident. Colin's smile never faltered, but a shadow crossed his face as he glanced at the table and found no sign of his plan's success. After the dinner, Adrian and Margaret retreated to a quiet balcony. "That was too close," Adrian said, his voice tight. Margaret nodded. "Evil wears the guise of festivity. Courage must move silently to protect the innocent." Far below, Collins stood in the hall, pretending calm. But his mind churned. Someone had thwarted him, someone bold enough to face danger within his own palace. And Margaret Rowan, the widow who dared, knew the truth. The kingdom could only survive as long as courage, wisdom, and vigilance walked hand in hand, even in the face of gold, music, and laughter. The palace was quiet, but danger was closer than anyone imagined. Minister Collins had learned of the secret alliance, and his vengeance simmered in silence. It began with small signs. A servant reported missing keys, doors left unlocked, and messages disappearing from the prince's study. Margaret and Adrian realized the betrayal came from inside their trusted walls. That night, the palace was dressed in shadows. Lanterns flickered, and the wind moaned like a warning. Margaret gathered the alliance in a hidden chamber. "Tonight," she whispered, "Collins will strike. We must be ready." Prince Adrian's jaw tightened. "Who can we trust? Even Sir Malcolm seems unsettled. Could he turn again?" Margaret shook her head. "Courage will guide us. The loyal must act, and the disloyal will show themselves." As midnight approached, Collins moved swiftly. He had bribed the kitchen staff to poison the prince's personal meal and planted false messages to mislead the guards. Margaret, sensing the danger, had replaced the meal with a decoy. Captain Daniel and Eleanor waited nearby, silent and alert. Suddenly, a shadow moved across the hall. Sir Malcolm stepped forward, not to betray, but to protect. He had seen Collins' plan and returned to the side of truth. "Madam Rowan," he whispered, I cannot let him succeed." Margaret nodded. "Then act swiftly. Tonight, the truth must win." The first strike came from the east corridor. A group of mercenaries hired by Collins stormed toward the prince's quarters. Lanterns fell, shouts echoed, and chaos erupted. Prince Adrian drew his sword, fighting side by side with Margaret and Captain Daniel. Margaret moved with courage, throwing herself between the prince and attackers, deflecting blades and striking with precision. Eleanor dashed through corridors, warning the loyal servants, locking doors, and creating obstacles for the intruders. The battle was fierce, the palace shaking with clashing steel and shouting voices. Collins, disguised among the chaos, tried to reach the prince, but Margaret intercepted him, her eyes steady, her hands firm. "You cannot win with treachery," she said. "This kingdom survives on courage, not fear. With coordinated skill, The alliance overpowered Colin's men, binding them and revealing Colin's disguise. Exhausted but victorious, Margaret and Adrian stood in the flickering candlelight, their breaths heavy, faces bruised, but determined. King Edward, awakened by the commotion, appeared in the hall. His eyes widened at the chaos, then softened as he saw the loyalty and bravery around him. "Margaret, Adrian," he said, voice trembling, "you have saved more than a life tonight. You have saved the soul of this kingdom." And Margaret, the widow whose courage had challenged kings and ministers alike, knew one truth: even in betrayal, bravery and unity could shine brighter than any shadow. The night ended with the palace alive once more, not with celebration, but with the quiet satisfaction of survival and the lessons learned in darkness. After the night of betrayal, King's Hill Palace rested in cautious peace. Yet Margaret felt a weight lingering in the air, a story left untold, a secret waiting to awaken. It came in a letter, hidden in the private chambers of King Edward Rowan, written long ago by the late Queen Isabella. Her words, sealed and delicate, spoke of courage, sacrifice, and a truth no one had known. Margaret carefully unfolded the letter in the quiet of her room. Candlelight flickered across the parchment. "To those who love the kingdom more than themselves, a secret lies beneath the hills east of the palace. There you will find what can protect or destroy the royal lineage. Trust only hearts that are brave and true." Prince Adrian entered. Seeing the letter, his face paled. "The Queen left us a secret?" he asked. "Yes," Margaret replied, "and it is our duty to find it. Someone may try to use it against the kingdom. We cannot fail." That night, guided by the letter, Margaret, Adrian, Captain Daniel, and Eleanor made their way through the secret passages beneath King's Hill Palace. The air was damp, the stone walls cold. Every echo felt alive, every shadow a warning. They reached a hidden chamber beneath the eastern hills. There, carved into the walls, were the Queen's instructions, a map leading to an ancient vault containing royal scrolls, symbols of protection, and a key to the true lineage of the throne. But danger awaited. Minister Collins had learned whispers of the secret, sending a group of mercenaries to intercept them. Shadows moved in the dark, silent and lethal. Margaret held her hand up. "Courage and truth will guide us," she whispered. "We move carefully, together." The group advanced, dodging traps set centuries ago to protect the vault. Each step tested their wits and bravery. When they finally reached the inner chamber, the Queen's vault lay open, revealing scrolls and artifacts glowing faintly in the lantern light. Prince Adrian picked up one scroll. This proves the royal lineage and the true claim to the throne. We have what Collins cannot touch." Suddenly, a noise, a shadow leaping from the corner. Mercenaries had found them. A brief clash erupted, but Margaret, calm and precise, protected Adrian as Captain Daniel subdued the intruders. Eleanor blocked the exit, ensuring no one escaped. In the aftermath, they secured the Queen's secret. The scrolls and artifacts were returned safely to a hidden chamber within the palace, accessible only to those with courage and loyalty. Standing in the moonlit chamber, Margaret whispered to Adrian, "The Queen left us this secret because she knew the kingdom needed more than swords and crowns. It needed wisdom, courage, and hearts willing to protect what is right." Prince Adrian nodded, eyes filled with awe. "We will honor her legacy, Margaret. Together, we will protect the kingdom, no matter the darkness that comes." And Margaret, the widow whose courage had guided princes and challenged ministers, realized that some secrets are not meant to harm. They are meant to strengthen, to inspire, and to protect those brave enough to guard them. The kingdom of Kings Hill had endured betrayal, deceit, and threats from those who sought to claim power through fear. But through it all, one woman, Margaret Rowan, had stood unwavering, her heart steady, her courage shining brighter than any crown. The morning after uncovering the Queen's last secret, Margaret walked through the palace courtyard. Soldiers and servants alike paused to bow. Her reputation was no longer just that of a widow. She was the shield of the kingdom, the voice of justice. Prince Adrian approached, holding a scroll from the Queen's vault. "Margaret," he said, voice full of respect and awe, "your courage has protected us all. The kingdom owes its life to you." Margaret shook her head. "It is not courage alone, Adrian. It is loyalty, wisdom, and the hearts willing to stand together. That is what saved this kingdom." That day, the palace council gathered in the grand hall. Minister Collins and his mercenaries were brought forth, their plans laid bare. The king's voice rang strong. "Let justice be swift, let betrayal be met with consequence, but let the brave be honored, for they are the true strength of our kingdom." Margaret stepped forward. She did not seek praise, yet all eyes turned to her. "A kingdom is not protected by gold or titles," she said. "It is protected by those who act when fear would hold them back, by those who defend truth and life, even when the night is darkest." The king nodded solemnly. "You, Margaret Rowan, have proven that courage is the crown that outshines all others. You are forever honored in Kings Hill." Even the young maid Eleanor and loyal Captain Daniel felt the weight of pride and relief. The alliance had survived. The kingdom was safe, and the people could once again live without fear. As sunset bathed the palace in gold, Margaret and Adrian stood on the balcony overlooking the city. Children played in the streets, merchants called out, and life went on, vibrant, full of promise, and free. Adrian turned to Margaret. "Do you ever regret it? The risks we took?" Margaret smiled softly, her eyes reflecting the fading sun. "No. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is acting despite it. And today, the kingdom lives because we dared to act." The king placed a hand on Adrian's shoulder. "Your mother's legacy lives on, in bravery, in loyalty, and in the hearts of those who protect our people. And Margaret, you have become part of that legacy." That night, the palace glowed, not with jewels or wealth, but with the warmth of trust, courage, and unity. Margaret Rowan, once a widow shrouded in sorrow, had become the light that guided Kings Hill through its darkest hours. And children, remember this. Courage is not measured by titles, wealth, or swords. True courage is shown in love for others, in standing for what is right, and in protecting the innocent, even when the night is long and the path is uncertain. The kingdom lived, the brave were honored, and Margaret's courage became a story told for generations. Dear viewers, what lesson did you take away from this dramatic tale? We'd love to hear from your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the story, give us a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest updates. Thanks for watching and stay blessed.